Before we start, could we check, are you hearing me all right?
Yes, you loud and clear. Yep.
That's great. And is my PowerPoint presentation showing?
Yes.
Yes, okay. I just wanted to check, so it's not just a PowerPoint application. Okay. So Christian or Asim, is it time to start or should we wait for something?
I think we can start, yeah.
Okay. My name is Torvald Mårtensson, and I will do the second presentation for Software Center Project 6. And as you can see on the first title of the presentation is the mallet model, maturity levels for exploratory testing. And this is a study that has been including 8 case study companies, which you also see here on the slide, and including myself, Mårtensson from Saab, and Daniel Ståhl from Ericsson and Linköping University, and Antonio Martini, University of Oslo, and finally Jan Bosch from Chalmers. I'd like to start with saying a few words about what is then exploratory testing. For some of you, this might be something new, but for some of you, you've been participating perhaps in our presentations and studies earlier. But since some people might be new, I'd like to start with saying a few than just a term. Exploratory testing is a test technique that differs from what we can call traditional software. It is not based on pre-designed test cases. Instead of putting your confidence in a written test case where you have an instruction step by step what to do, you instead put your confidence in the tester. So you give a task for the tester to test a function or like characteristics like HMI or security, and then give the tester more freedom to use his creativity and his experience to test it in the best way. If you're interested in exploratory testing, there are 3 books that we'd like to recommend. The first one is Elizabeth Henrikson's Explore It, which is a quite comprehensive description of the test technique. The second one is Janet Gregory and Lisa Crispin with More Agile Testing, where one of the chapters is dedicated to exploratory testing and is a bit more condensed version. And finally, there's our own work from Daniel Ståhl and myself, the book Continuous Practices, where we describe how exploratory testing plays a role in the continuous creation and delivery pipeline. So this study builds that I'm presenting here today builds very much on our previous work. We've done a series of studies related to exploratory testing. And the last study, before the one that I'm presenting here today, the result of that study was a list of key factors that can enable efficient and effective exploratory testing. So we have this list of key factors, and we use that to develop a model which we call the mallet model. Presenting here today is the mallet model and also the validation of the model. So this model, what is it then? Well, what we've seen in our studies is that companies evolve in the way they practice exploratory testing. And that in the analysis of the order in which we could observe these key factors, the key factors for efficient and effective exploratory testing, we saw that there's a typical that companies seem to follow in their evolution path. What we then did is that we constructed this model, and we'll refer to this pattern that we.
Torvald, I'm sorry to disturb, Torvald, but you are continuously lagging and there's interruption internet. I thought I should let you know if you want to say something.
Okay. So what is it that you actually can't hear my voice, or is it?
You get disconnected. Your voice is not continuously, so you miss some words. The internet causes.
Okay. So take it step by step then. Okay, so my connection here seems fine, so unfortunately I'm not sure what to do about it. Okay, so far we'll take it step by step. So far we'll say that we have constructed this model based on our previous studies, and what this is a description of the typical pattern that companies follow as their evolution path as when they're introducing exploratory testing. Okay. Step by step, see what to present this model then, what we did is, as we said, we observed the companies and constructed this model, which is then includes 4 levels, which is then permission, competence, results, and respect. And the first level is then permission. And that means that either an empowered team or a manager in the organization introduces exploratory testing in the organization. And that means that you actually start using something that you refer to as exploratory testing. And that doesn't mean that you're doing this in a good way or that you're and have any large benefit from it, but you're practicing something that you call exploratory testing, which could be more or less that you have a test case, which is called exploratory testing. So what you will see then is that you have then a bit of new challenges that that you bring on the table compared to if you previously have worked just with test cases. And that would be that you have a problem with, for example, testers that previously relied on very well specified test cases, which now must then instead rely on their own competence. So testers might find that they don't have enough knowledge about the product that they are testing, or that they don't have enough knowledge about how the product actually is used. You might also see that exploratory testing might not be for everyone. And that is that testers are curious and want to learn is one of the key factors that we've seen from previous studies. So if you're more like a person who likes to have detailed instructions, then you have this problem that then you might want to move to another department where you also practice testing with test cases. So you work with this. Perhaps you recruit some new people, and you give a more you train the people that you have in your team with exploratory testers, and then you arrive at maturity level number 2. And then I'd like to just ask: is the sound better, or are we still having the same problem?
It's a bit better, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry that we don't have that we have some kind of problem. So, well, okay, we'll see. Okay, so we then arrive at competence level 2, which is then about competence. So what we have competence, and then it's about other challenges that arrive on the table, and that is that, for example, you start hearing questions from your testers. What is actually the purpose and scope of the test activity? Who is actually the stakeholder? Why are we doing this? And it might seem that it's very strange that this can appear after a while, but you often introduce this as an idea. After a while, you find the purpose, you find the place for this kind of testing when you started using it and used it for a while. So the testers, but also managers, they ask for what is then what's the good way to report this kind of testing, and managers might express that, well, it was better earlier when we used test cases, because then you could say that, well, I have these 15 test cases, and 10 of them are executed, and 8 of them are passed. That's much more better. So there will be a lot of questions about purpose and scope and how the activity is reported, and also about test environment and where this test activity is placed in relation to other test activities. So the organization, of course, then starts to work with this, and the developers, they get better feedback when the way that you report is getting better. So the purpose and scope is getting more clearer, and management also after a while seem to appreciate more that this is a good way to see the status actually of your project. And then you arrive at maturity level number 3, which is then about results. the developers and managers, they now always ask for the test results. So then you have a lot of benefit from exploratory testing, but you still have things to do in order to have really efficient and effective exploratory testing. And that is that you should have more have the team of exploratory testing to have them working better together as a team instead of just working as lone wolves. And it's also about finding good ways of working when it comes to not just producing bug reports, but also to have as quick, as short time as possible to not just identify your problems, but also to fix them in the organization. So it's about optimizing the complete flow. So when you have worked with these problems, you arrive at what we refer to as maturity level number 4, which is about respect. So there you have that all affected parts of the organization work together around exploratory testing. What we did here is that we had this model and went out to these 8 companies that we were part of the validation. And we asked them to describe their journey from that exploratory testing was introduced in the company to, and also what kind of problems they had found, etc. And asked them also how they could relate to this mallet model and the different maturity levels, where they should place themselves in the model, and what kind of things they thought, what kind of factors that made them go to a higher maturity level. And also if they thought that there were factors that could take you to a lower maturity level. So what we see here is that for most companies, you start, of course, at maturity level number 1, where exploratory testing is introduced. Then quite fast, they move on to level 2, and then arrive after a while somewhere between level 3 and 4. We also can see that there are some companies that describe themselves as still stuck at level 1 or 2. And also that the road forward is not always just forward. It's for company C and D, we see that they have made a U-turn in going backwards as they describe in the model, which means, for example, in the case of company E, they introduced exploratory testing, used it for a while, and then there was this management decision that all testing in the company should be based on test cases, which means that you're beyond permission. You're not permitted to do exploratory testing. Okay, so we also asked what is then the factors that can take you to a higher maturity level. And there were 3 things that was brought forward by the companies. One was showing results. And that means that when you start using exploratory testing, and after a while you see benefits, that you see that it's a good way to find tricky problems, then the interest from both developers and management seem to grow. You also need a will to improve and change, and someone even called for must have some kind of crisis in order to introduce this new way to test. And finally, sometimes it just takes time, that the organization must mature and realize that this is something good. So 3 things that we found that could actually lead to a higher maturity level. Then we have things that could take you to a lower maturity level. And one of these things is a new product that is introduced, which is then, for example, if you introduce either a completely new product or if you introduce cloud technology in your existing product. Then you don't have the knowledge actually about what is this and how should I test it? So you go backwards. And also, of course, if your testers change jobs, if they're a tight team that work together and suddenly half of your crew, your exploratory testers, they quit. And then you have to build a new group of testers. Could also be, as we saw from the previous example, management decisions where someone says that we're not doing this or we're not giving resources for this, etc. When we had these validation interviews, we found that the mallet model was well received by the interviewees during the validation, and they described the model as sound, relevant, and useful in practice, which we can see, for example, quotes here, one of them saying that the model was spot on. Someone else said that this is a good way to find how we can improve. And of course, then improve exploratory testing in the organization. So it's time for summary and takeaways. What we found here is that the 4 maturity levels in the mallet model is a good representation of the typical evolution path that companies seem to adopt. Seem to take when they adopt exploratory testing. So the validation companies, all these 8 companies, representatives could relate to the model, could place themselves in the model and see that the factors, the maturity levels were in an order corresponding to their own journey. We also saw that the path is not always forward in the mallet model, meaning that in 2 cases we see not just went forward to a higher maturity level, but also that they made a U-turn going backwards. We also seen, which we didn't talk so much about previously, that improvement initiatives tend to fail if they are not planned in an order corresponding to the maturity levels. And that could be, for example, in 2 cases, the companies described that they want to introduce exploratory testing in another part of the company, and then started with instructions and documents, which is something that ways of working is in the model placed on level 3. And so they did that instead of working with testers. Which people should we choose for the group of testers? And as it seemed, the descriptions from both of these companies was that the approach to start with documents didn't work at all. We also see that as a good confirmation of that order of the factors, so the factors that we've seen could enable efficient and effective exploratory testing is placed in the right order in the model. So of course, this is, as Daniel said in the previous presentation, this is a model which is a simplification of the real world. But so it's not an exact recipe for how you should introduce an exploratory testing in an organization. But as it seems, it's a structured way to describe in which ways that companies can introduce different things in order to use exploratory testing. So as it seems, it could be a good way to be better at exploratory testing in an organization. Okay, and that concludes the presentation, and I hope that you heard most of the presentation. So then I'm happy to take questions. Yes, please.
Hello, Torvald. Thank you for your presentation, and it was a really interesting approach to put it into a maturity level like that. Just one question from my side. Exploratory testing has also an important aspect of getting to know the system you are testing, or even to use it for new tester to train on it. Have you thought about this aspect while building these maturity models? I think, in my personal opinion, you're at the top in this maturity model if you can bring new people inside your project, and you use exploratory testing at the beginning so they know the system, get to know the system, to ask the questions and not only read documents and so on. So ask the question, why is it here? And so you can take them into the right direction, and of course getting productive and finding bugs at the end. So this is a fluid transition from learning to actually finding bugs. How does this thought fit in your maturity model?
So I'm not really sure about the question, but I think what you're asking is that how components about the product is that an important thing for exploratory testing, and how is that related to the model? Is that correct?
I'm actually asking, I'm missing a little bit in the model, this learning part, because it could also be a sign of the maturity of the company when we talk about exploratory testing. Is that actually, and the question is, would you consider it introducing it in your maturity model?
Well,
the learning aspect.
To start with, this that you have competence around your product is, as you said, one of the factors in the list of key factors for efficient and effective exploratory testing, and that is also part of the first level. So what we say is that in order to do a good testing, then you must know what kind of product that you're testing. But as you say that, well, you must also have a learning perspective, and I would say that that's also the primary thing, that you have that approach. And in the books that I had at the first slide, I read about this, that Elizabeth Henriksson, for example, says that it's important that you don't have the view that you know everything about the product. You must then instead say that, well, why am I doing this? Because I want to learn about the product. So that is a response or answer to your question.
Yes, I think I understood your answer. Thank you.
Okay. Yes. Are there any other? Thank you, Fredrik Hugosson. Did you have a question?
Yeah, maybe along the same line. What I was thinking was that we're talking a lot about testers here. Is it really necessary that this work or this role is done by a tester? Couldn't it be a rotating role in a development team?
Well, interesting. As perhaps you know, we are practicing exploratory testing here at Saab, where we have these teams of exploratory that practice exploratory testing. But actually, the testers, what we call the testers, they are actually not full-time testers working at a separate department. They are actually the same engineers that are building the software. That is part of their time. They are part of a virtual test team. So in that role, we refer to them as testers, but they also work in the development teams. And for us, that has been a success factor, because then they know exactly how is the product built, what kind of product are they building, and they have the developer perspective. So you might then ask, but aren't they testing their own software? And the answer is yes and no, because we have people from different teams. That, for example, we have the team that are constructing the radar application. They are testing together with the decision support system guys and the HMI guys. And the decision support system is then using the radar system and vice versa. So as they are testing each other's subsystems and see that it all works together, it works quite well for us.
Yeah, sounds really like a good approach. I actually think that would be part of the successes in your maturity model. That would maybe be possible to add to the last step there, that you actually have the possibility to rotate this among development teams in some way.
Yeah, we have in the research paper that we have are writing here. That's also described that this approach. And as you perhaps saw in the third maturity level, that the testers work together as a team, will complementing approaches is also in the model. But I believe, for at least, I think it depends on the product you're building. But in our case, it has been, as you say, a success factor to have developers in a virtual test team instead of separate testers.
Yeah, thanks. Really interesting.
Yeah, thank you. I think there was some other question as well, was it? Or is everyone okay? Okay, if there are no other questions, I thank you so much for having me, and I presume that it's then Asim who's at 2 o'clock. Okay, thank you so much.